Ave Maria, praise be Jesus Christ. Today I'm going to call this little video Eastern Orthodox Interactions. And I imagine with a name like this, we are going to have some Eastern Orthodox joining us. Little intro, I'm Father David Nix. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, a traditional one. And today I want to talk about this recent meeting between Rome and Constantinople. Now, for new Catholics that are watching, I'm going to use some terms you might not be familiar with. Every time I talk about the Eastern Orthodox, there's always some confusion on the difference between Eastern Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. So I'm going to put in the show notes CPX 33, and that's going to explain the difference in the Eastern churches, the Eastern rites between Eastern Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. Most of today is going to be geared towards the Eastern Orthodox, but I think our Eastern Orthodox listeners are actually going to like what I have to say, even though I admit that at this point, our differences are insurmountable. I know that sounds ironic at this point to say the Eastern Orthodox is going to like it, even though our dogmatic issues are very big, but you're going to be surprised where I go with this whole thing. The other thing that some new listeners may not be aware of is filioque. That's a term that we're going to use in this. Filioque is the Latin for and the Son, and the big debate is, well, both Eastern and Western Christians admit that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. The question is, does the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father and the Son? And so the Roman Catholic Church says yes, and the Eastern Orthodox, at least today, say no. So they reject the filioque, but we Roman Catholics say yes. Now, the basics of all of this I put in an article. I'm also going to put that in the show notes. So the one video I put in the show notes, that's going to be the difference between Eastern Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. And then the article I'm putting in the show notes is going to explain why I believe not only did the Western Church Fathers hold to the filioque, but even the Eastern Fathers. Probably going to have some comments from the Eastern Orthodox, but hear me out before you jump in the filioque, because today isn't really about that. It really is about True-Ecumenism versus false ecumenism. Now, in this recent meeting in Istanbul, they left out of the creed the filioque. That's this last weekend of November 2025 when I'm making this video. Well, it's actually December 2025, a couple days after that meeting. So now you have Catholics online saying, while I believe in the filioque, well, unity with the Eastern churches, with the Eastern Orthodox, is worth keeping it out of the creed. Okay, even though I think they're wrong, here's what they're missing on this. Most of the commentators in the Catholic world are not even aware that there's a whole smoke and mirrors game that's affecting us, that there's actually 3 debates that we could be having, should be having, would be having if it weren't for these smoke and mirrors. And the 3 debates surrounding this is, 1, the filioque, the reality of the Trinity. We're not talking about the creed. Does the Holy Spirit really proceed from Father and Son in reality? So that's the first thing that needs to be debated. The second thing that needs to be debated is, can a creed develop? The Eastern Orthodox do point out that we Roman Catholics added the filioque into the creed in the 11th century. Is that okay? Well, that's an important debate, but it's a different debate of if the Holy Spirit literally proceeds from the Son in eternity. And then the third debate that people are having online is, does doctrine even matter to the bigwigs who just met up at this ecumenical meeting in Istanbul this last weekend? Now, I answer all of those with the Church Fathers and recent church history in the article I put in the show notes on the filioque. But before, on this video, re-answering the third, I want to tell a little story of when I visited some Eastern Orthodox monks. So a few years ago, I was staying with a Catholic family, not in my own home state, and in the morning they said, just down the road, several miles down the road, they live very rurally, and they said, there's an Eastern Orthodox monastery 10 miles down the road. I said, I'd like to really go see it. So this couple, maybe they're about 10, 15 years older than me, they brought me to this monastery. A beautiful, beautiful place. One thing that we traditional Roman Catholics like about Eastern Orthodox art and churches is they maintain very old art and very old churches. Even if it's done in even if it's made new, it still maintains the old beauty. And so I was very excited to go there. And so I go there with this couple, again, a couple 10, 15 years older than me, and we end up talking to some of the monks. 2, 3, 4 of the monks come out. It's a very nice day, sunny day, and they're outside. And one of the monks, one of these Eastern Orthodox monks, kisses my hand, and I let him do it because, we Catholic priests, sometimes Filipino women do that, Mexican women will often do that. And we got talking a little bit, and then about 30 seconds after this monk kissed my hand, he realized I was Catholic, and his face looked like he wanted to spit. He was not happy that he kissed the hand of a Roman Catholic priest. Now, I didn't lie to him up to that point. I felt a little embarrassed that I let him do it because I do want to respect, his beliefs on something like that. And so the tension just mounted at this point, that they realized we were Catholics, and he had just kissed my hand, something that the Orthodox do to Orthodox priests. And so a little bit of tension, but they didn't get rude, but there was definitely tension here. And so I think, honestly, now I can't prove this, but in retrospect, I think these monks are sick of Catholics showing up and saying, isn't it great we all love Jesus, dogma doesn't matter, we're all on the right, we're all on the same track. And suspecting this, I took a little bit of a risk. So here I have 2 Catholics at my side. I'm in front of 5 monks, 5 Eastern Orthodox monks. These are not Eastern Catholic monks. These are Eastern Orthodox monks. And I went out on a limb in all this tension, not sure where this was going to go. And I said, look, I think you guys are heretics on the Filioque, and I know you think I'm a heretic on the Filioque and some other things. I said, but I do listen to Father Josiah Trenum. He's a Greek Antiochian Orthodox priest out of LA. I really like the fact that he is objective, that he puts objective truth ahead of fake ecumenism, that he puts God's law ahead of Christian humanism. And as I said this, and keep in mind, I just called them heretics, and I admitted that they think I'm a heretic as a Roman Catholic priest. You wouldn't believe it. The tension outside just lowered. A smile came across their face. They took a deep breath, and they were open to real conversation. It's really funny. Liberals love words like accompaniment and dialogue. When I was talking to hardcore monks, like I'm apparently, as people call me, a hardcore traditional Roman Catholic priest, but the amazing thing is, when I said these words that didn't sound very ecumenical, using words like heresy, ironically, they relaxed and they wanted to talk to me at this point. And so there was even one monk there who was blind. Looks like he had no eyes, very old. He had a long white beard. And he said, do you know the SSPX? And I said, oh yeah, I'm friends with the SSPX. And he goes, my aunt goes there. I like the sound of them. Now, of course, there's going to be some liberal Catholics listening to this video saying, oh, that's because Eastern Orthodox are schismatic and so is SSPX. But if you can get over like really facile, accusations, here's where I'm going with the story. And the story is absolutely true. Where I'm going in this story is to show that when 2 Orthodox, capital O Orthodox for them, little o Orthodox for me, Orthodox Christians meet, if you really love God, you are not going to just cover over dogma as if it doesn't matter and say, isn't it great we all have like some type of basic amorphous beliefs as, I don't know, Unitarians or something like that. When I told these monks that I put God ahead of them, and when I made it clear that I understood that they put God ahead of me and what I think of them, amazingly, we then had a beautiful conversation where we trusted each other. In other words, we came to the conclusion things like the Filioque really matter. I wasn't about to go pray the Psalms in their chapel with them because you can't pray with heretics. That would be their rule, and that would be my rule. And amazingly, when we came to this conclusion that God matters more than man, we actually made real progress. That is what ecumenism looks like, or real ecumenism. False ecumenism is essentially saying it doesn't matter. Why did people in the past debate dogma when all you have to do is say you believe in God? And even then, most modernist Catholics are going to say, well, atheists with reduced culpability are going to be saved anyway. So what really matters at the end of the day for these silly ecumenical meetings? Nothing. Nothing actually matters at all. So I tell you that story, what happened with these monks. And by the way, I left on very good terms with these monks. I think they were amazed. They had finally met a Catholic priest who put dogma ahead of like some Christian humanism. And so that shows that serious Christians will never put this humanism-based friendship ahead of dogma. So, sorry to say it, but that recent stunt meeting in Turkey was only a statement to say dogma doesn't matter when we establish a one-world religion. If you think that's an exaggeration, ask yourself, why wasn't the Moscow Patriarchate invited to this meeting? You know why? Because Moscow is less likely to believe in false ecumenism, just like I'm very not likely to believe in false ecumenism. And honestly, I admire them for that. It's not because I'm tempted to go Eastern Orthodox. I wouldn't have just called monks heretics for rejecting the Filioque. But I think most of the hardcore Eastern Orthodox watching this video, if there's any ROCOR people out there, if these monks ever see this video, if Father Josiah Trenum, I like his work out there. Obviously, we disagree on some major things, but I love the people that put God ahead of me, even when I think they're wrong. Why is that? Because there's two great commandments that Christ gave. The first is to love the Lord, your God, with your whole heart, soul, strength, and mind. And the second is to love your neighbors yourself. Well, the first has to come first. So dogma has to come ahead of just piddly little reach across the aisle, let's agree nothing matters at all. That is not what the apostles died for. And actually, we traditional Roman Catholics would admit that, and so would the hardcore Eastern Orthodox. That's what we have in common, even if we disagree. You know, if I were Pope and the Orthodox came to me, I would say to them, you have to accept the Filioque to come into union with Rome. What would they say to that? They'd say, no way. At least not before, say, Russia is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary by a Pope. I then think we're going to get miracles that's going to grease the skids for them to say yes to that. I do think we are going to have unity on things like the Filioque. But before that miracle that probably converts Eastern Orthodox Russians into Eastern Catholics, now I'm going into private revelation, so I might have lost some people. We'll get back on the main topic here. Before that happens, most Eastern Orthodox who are hardcore will say no, but they would sit down, have a nice meal, not pray together, because you can't pray with heretics, and they would say that too, and then agree to disagree. But agreeing that dogma doesn't matter, that does not please God. There's just no chance. And so I'm not saying I have any idea the name of the final Antichrist, but we do know that the Church Fathers say that the final Antichrist will establish a man-centered, one-world religion. Traditional Eastern Orthodox and traditional Roman Catholics both know the Church Fathers enough to say that the final Antichrist will establish a man-centered, one-world religion where dogma doesn't matter at all. So anyone, and again, I'm not saying I know the name of that person. I'm not naming that or even implying I know who that person is. But I do know that anyone making false peace by saying dogma doesn't matter, they are not making converts to Jesus Christ. They're only forwarding the advance of humanism. And I would caution you very much to follow in that pathway. And I think so with the Eastern Orthodox out there. Those monks that I met, they do not believe we can just push aside dogma and say, isn't it all nice that we are humans or something like that? That is humanism, not Christianity. And at least we have that in common, me and the Eastern Orthodox, despite all of our differences. And those differences really do matter. We can't just sideline those. We have to love God more than that person in the church across the Bosporus, because only Jesus Christ can save us, not some false humanism.